Hello, hello, I'm Kads, and welcome back to the Raid Starter Pack. This is episode 3 in our Dungeon Deep Dive series, and today we'll be focusing on Kadsistency, the Ice Golem. Historically, Ice Golem has been considered one of the worst dungeons to farm in the game, but it is also one of the most finicky as far as a success rate is concerned. But the reason it was the most unpopular, just for a little bit of background here, is because it contains some of the campaign or base sets in the game, which just simply don't sell for as much silver as compared to Fire Knight, for example. But in recent years, they've buffed good sets like Reflex, they've buffed Cursed, Provoke has come into meta with Hydra, Retaliation was reduced from a 4-piece to a 2-piece, Resistance is always good, and somewhat underrated in my opinion. But some of the bottom sets have been improved over the years, and thus Ice Golem is a lot more desirable. So as I mentioned, Ice Golem can be very, very finicky. He's a boss that you want to do quickly, but not too quickly, because too quickly can easily end up wiping your entire team. And on the surface, the Ice Golem has a very simplistic kit as far as abilities go. He just has 2 AoEs, one of which just attacks all enemies, and other places to increase accuracy for 2 turns. But his bread and butter ability is really contained within the passive here, Frigid Vengeance, which will attack all enemies one time whenever his HP drops below these specific thresholds, so 80%, 60%, 45%, 30%, and 15%, meaning that throughout the course of the fight, unless you are over damaging these caps, you will get counterattacked at least 5 times, and there's not much you can do about that. And the reason this ability can hurt so much is because the Ice Golem has 2 minions, and when both minions are alive, he will ignore 100% of your team's defense. That is 50% per alive minion, which of course means that no matter how much defense you have on your team, 6,000, 5,000, whatever, all of it will be ignored, and he will be dealing pure damage directly to your HP pool. And if you cannot take that hit, you will wipe your entire team. Thankfully, of course, the minions are targetable, meaning that they can die, so you can kill them. Thus, you can take reduced damage or normal damage from this counterattack when it happens. But unthankfully, we'll make up a word here, he will revive his minions every time he does this counterattack. So if they are not blocked, if the revive is not blocked, then they will pop back up and you'll have to deal with them again in some way, shape, or form, and then continue on through the cycle at least 5 times, or at most 5 times. On top of that, this ability also has a chance to place freezes, and it's increased by each of his minions being alive. So you can freeze your team, which can disrupt your ability cycling and whatnot. So it can be a very, very big nuisance to deal with this ability. So what are the best ways to kill the Ice Golem? I mean, he's susceptible to the same things that most bosses are susceptible to, so enemy max HP. However, as we talked about, you're guaranteed to get counterattacked at these thresholds, so that can be extremely dangerous if it happens at the wrong time, and there's a lot of RNG surrounding that. So most often people go with poisons and or HP burns to deal with Ice Golem, or you have some sort of strategy to block revive on the minions, which we will see a little bit later. So as per usual, we are going to be starting off with stage 13 for the showcases here, and this team that I've thrown together should look very, very similar if you've been watching the other installments in this series, and that it's basically the Dragon team copied and pasted, because when you're in the early game, you're going to have a core set of champions that you're going to use across the board in every single dungeon, basically, until you play long enough to start getting more and more champions to start diversifying your roster. So we have Apothecary in the lead for some tournament control, as well as some spot healing. We have Reliquary Tender in case we get frozen, to cleanse as well as heal and revive in case anyone dies. We have Ward Maiden, our campaign farmable debuffer. Even though she is negative affinity, doesn't matter. Whatever works for the stage can work. If you have a better champion who's a positive affinity, then you can swap her in. We have Kale, our representative starter champion. He's going to be our primary DPS, but also, as I mentioned, poisons can be a solid way to kill the boss. And then we have Frozen Banshee in here as our other poisoner on the team. Let's go ahead and run this team so you guys can see it in action. So the first thing I want to note here is that this is not necessarily an optimized team for the fastest runs or most efficient or whatever. It's just that a team that I know can actually be successful, and it will probably more on the slower side. We're not really going to get much of an advantage from poisons in this case, just because we're going to be lapping the boss so much that he's not going to take that many turns. But that's just the nature of having relatively fast built champions. And we're mostly going to be employing the fact that we can, as you just saw, we can kill the minions, and we're going to start triggering the passive, and you'll see that he'll bring them back. But we're going to have to keep killing the minions over and over and over again, whilst we do damage to the boss in the meantime as well. So the danger here of having, or being in the end game for me at least, is that again, my champions are well built, and so they will easily hit his thresholds repeatedly back to back to back, stuff like that. So I might take big smacks here just from doing too much damage, but when you're at the stage, your gear's not going to be up to this level, so you shouldn't necessarily have to worry about that happening to your team. But yeah, so this should be just over a minute or so. Again, it looks pretty quick because all of my champions are in relatively relatively well built and an endgame gear. So you might not be this fast on your first run, and it might be a little more scary depending on how much damage your team deals. But you can see here we have a healthy balance of some support and some DPS, but not too much DPS because we don't want to take too much damage from the boss. So now let's fast forward in time to the point where you're looking at stage 20, which probably is a few months down the road. You have a few more champions on your account, a few more epics, maybe some legendaries, and we have this team here, which essentially does the same thing, but in a slightly different form. So we've upgraded our War Maiden to Stagnite as far as decreased defense, but more importantly, we're adding decreased attack to this team because the Ice Golem is going to hit harder as you go up and up and up in stages. We're keeping Reliquary Tender in, same thing, our Healer, Cleanser, and Reviver in case people go down. We're changing our Nuker of Kale out for Dark Elhaine, a daily log reward champion, because if the team gets frozen, she gets to get free counterattacks or free activation of her A2, which just does a lot of damage. We have Fanax in the mix, who has a block revive on his A1, which we may or may not get to see depending on the RNG of his hits on wave 3. And then we're introducing the slot of a protection champion, which can be any number of things. It could be ally protection, could be someone in a guardian set, it could be Vogoth, for example. So someone that can either provide some sort of healing or just take some damage on behalf of other people. In this case, Vogoth is a great example because he also can place leech whenever he's hit, and so the people who deal damage can heal themselves as we go along. Let's go ahead and see this team in action as well. And one thing to note here is that on stage 20, you can definitely make a swap here and drop one of the DPS and bring in like your Soul of the Drakes, which you should have by this point, just to add a little extra safety, particularly on wave 2, because there are a couple of annoying champions, the Terror Beasts, that place reflect damage, so you can easily have your team or your nukers kill themselves with reflect damage. It's not as effective, reflect damage, not as effective on your team because your team does not have a bunch of HP, but all of the enemy waves have a ton of HP, and so you dealing your damage into them can easily take your nukers out. So in this case, one of the purposes of bringing in Fanax is because he does have block buffs on his A2 there, so we can do that, but also we do have Vogoth with the chance to provoke on his ability. So we have two ways to try and mitigate the fact that the Terror Beast can place reflect damage. Obviously there's resists, there's not 100% chance land rates, so every once in a while it's going to happen. But of course that's why we do have Reliquary Tender in the mix as well, to pick anybody up that happens to kill themselves. So just about a minute or so and we get through the waves here. And now we will see, pray to the RNG gods, that we can get some good RNG here and have Fanax actually block revive on the minions. Again, it depends on the RNG, whether or not he gets his ability off, whether or not there are enough debuffs. In this case, we probably get that one. Yep, there we go. So one is down, so that whenever the retribution hit comes up, that means that now permanently for the rest of this fight, he will only ignore a maximum of half of our defense. So we're moving right along. Unfortunately, Fanax did not kill the other minion, so that one's going to come back to life right about now when the retribution hit is coming. There we go. Revive blocked on the left, so you can see that one, but the one on the right has come back to life. No matter, we'll keep working on it and see if we can get that one down as well. So you can see we're taking a good amount of damage from the boss, but again, we have Vogoth placing the leech on him, and so that can allow us to heal up, and then Reliquary Tender, of course, allows us to heal as well. There we go. Second block revive. So now the boss will no longer ignore defense whenever we pop through the thresholds, which in this case, because once again, endgame player here, my champions are severely overtuned for this. So if any of our nukers hit the boss like we're just seeing, we're going to get a lot of counterattacks just because we're going to be hitting through the thresholds very, very quickly. So we should get another pop right here, or maybe not. Oh, we lost Decreased defense, that's why. But on their next turn, whoever goes next as between the nukers is going to trigger another one, or Vogoth just hits it off. There we go. So we're going to keep taking these smacks as we bleed through each of the thresholds. There we go, another pop. Now we're getting the freezes. There's Dark Elhaine's passive there popping off. Fanax unfortunately got frozen there, so we didn't get his hit. Oh, there's another one. Yeah, so this is the disadvantage, once again, of bringing too much damage to the fight, because you're just going to get back-to-back-to-back counterattacks. The boss is extremely slow, relatively speaking, and so, like I said, his bread and butter is really using the counterattacks to kill your team, not necessarily him taking many turns. In this case, I think he's taken maybe like 3 turns overall, but he's hit us, the 5 times for each of the counterattacks. So that's where he really gets it in. So we can see the damage here split between Fanax and Dark Elhaine. They're both doing their jobs. Again, we did get lucky on this particular one where we did get both of the minions block revived, but again, just the RNG of who's doing the damage at what time. Dark Elhaine can easily be the one who deals the finishing blow to the minions, therefore they'll be revived every single time, stuff like that. So weigh those pros and cons when you're building a team like this. Don't bring too much damage, or else you're going to face what we faced here, where we're just getting constantly back to back to back counterattacks. And again, if that happens at the wrong time, decrease attack isn't on, you can easily wipe your team, particularly if you have a bunch of squishy nukers on the team. So now let's take a look at what a late game team can look like with stage 25 here. And I already mentioned that poisons and HP burns can be viable strategies, but we didn't really get to see that in action. But we will with this team here. So we have Python in there. He's our insurance policy, one upgrade from Reliquary Tender, where he can cleanse us and provide some healing, as well as block debuffs in case of the freezes, and the minions also do apply hero reduction and decreased defense. Didn't mention that earlier, but that is important, that you don't want to have decreased defense on your team when he's laying down the smacks. We have a trio of poisoners here. We have Dark Kale, who can extend on his A2. We have Venomage, who has some poisons and a little bit of activation on the A1. Dark Kale also has poison activation. And then we have Theodore, who can also place some poisons and activate them. And then we have our Log and Reward champion, Artak, who places HP burn and also can activate them. And then we have two sources of redundant decrease attack, just to make sure that it's on at all times. Between stage 20 and 25 is usually when people start to bring in like the Seer comps and the Poison Explosion comps. And you can think of this team as a pretend Poison Explosion comp. I famously don't have a Poison Exploder, at least at the time of this recording. Maybe in the future, we'll see. But I do not have one, and so this is my pseudo Poison Explosion comp, and we can go ahead and run this team and see it in action. So essentially, we're not worrying about controlling the waves per se. We're kind of letting them take turns, but we are applying a lot of poisons, a lot of HP burns, extending them with Dark Kale, and then this is where you normally pop the poisons or whatever, but we don't have that champion. So Theodore does a little bit of it. Artak does a little bit of it with the popping of the HP burns, and then Venomage and Dark Kale can start popping with their A1s and get a few hits there. And it usually takes around 30 seconds per round, give or take, depending on the cooldowns and the order. But if everything goes according to expectation, like it kind of is right now at least, we kind of have things going off. You can see their extra turn. Dark Kale is in Relentless. We'll go over the builds on the champions at the end here. So this is a relatively clean run. So back to back, basically the waves killing themselves by activating the poisons on themselves, and then Theodore helping out with his passive there. So under a minute, we're here to the boss, and this is where we can start to stack up the poisons. So looks like people didn't have it back yet, but there we go. HP burns on the boss. We start with the poison cycling here. Poisons, poison, poisons. Decrease attack is importantly on the boss, and then we start popping the poisons. So the good thing about having Theodore here is that he can activate on all enemies, and we can also have Artak here. There's more enemies to activate HP burns on. So we're kind of doing all those at once to bring down the health of the boss. And ideally, he doesn't counterattack us at all. We're kind of popping through thresholds through the poisons and the HP burns, because if you did not know, the poisons and the HP burns, if they tick on him or you activate it with a Theodore or whoever, as long as it's not a big hit at the same time, he doesn't actually do the retribution hits. And as you can see here, we didn't get a single one, and he's basically done near the end here. A little more poisons or a little more activations and we'll get it down. But that is one way that you can bypass his passive, is by doing damage with HP burn activation, or just having him take turns with HP burn on, or dropping a load of poisons on him and having him kill himself when he takes turns. And so with a team similar to this, you can skip the retribution hits, because the damage that's taking, the damage reducing him below the thresholds is due to poisons and not physical hits, physical damage. And that's why you see a lot of those teams that feature the solo champions at this point. So like a Theodore and Regen can do a solo of this. UDK in a toxic set can do a solo of this, at least the boss stage. You also have like Dark Kale, Frozen Banshee, Venomage, Artak. Uragrim is very famous for it, Bad Alcazar. Champions who either do poisons and healing, or champions who do poisons with a regen set providing the healing. Now for the endgame section, I don't actually have a team to show you guys, because I don't actually farm stage 20 hard mode. I do actually farm still stage 25. That was my actual team. And the caveat with stage 10 on hard mode is that it's ridiculously hard to be reliably successful. The main things that changed between normal mode and hard mode is that he is now immune to poisons, and the primary mode of dealing damage to him is only HP burn, and I guess physical hits as well. He also cleanses himself every 4 turns. That ability that places decreased accuracy is also a cleanse, so it is kind of impossible to guarantee that he will always have decreased attack at all times, because you can't have it just stay there and extend it. You have to replace it, and if it's not there at the wrong time, like we talked about earlier, minions are alive, he counterattacks, he can instantly wipe your entire team. Unfortunately, what we really need doesn't exist within the game, but we kind of need a champion who can place decreased attack that cannot be removed. So a protected decreased attack. If there was such a champion in the game, I would personally be more willing to keep investing and trying out stage 10 hard mode teams. Obviously, you can see that I've done the stage, but I noticed that regardless of what team I came up with, eventually there was some bad RNG situation where they would wipe, and I don't like my teams wiping. So I'd rather just farm normal mode where it is safe for 100% chance. I don't have to worry about losing energy. But if you are endgame and you are looking for ideas of teams that have proven to be relatively reliable, this is where people have run like a super regen Artak or an Artak paired with someone like an Oella or an Elva Autumnborn, someone who can provide HP burns, decrease attack, and keep your team alive. I've also seen teams with an Elva Autumnborn and or Oella with a Walking Tomb Drang, so an irresistible HP burn, AoE, as well as a little bit of activation. So basically an HP burn champion who's ridiculously tanky and who can take hits while the boss is ignoring defense, but also a healer paired with them and or a reviver paired with them to keep them alive. So basically duo strategies is the only way that I've seen it done. But even then, there is still a chance that something doesn't land at the wrong time, because even without War Master or Giant Slayer, just having the HP threshold be at the wrong moment, even the weakest of support champions can do a little tickle on the boss and he can counterattack and wipe your whole team. So it can never truly be reliable unless we have some sort of protected decreased attack debuff in the future. All right, so let's talk about the builds on these champions. And I will once again preface this by saying that blessings are 1000% not mandatory for the success rate of any of these teams that you saw today. They do help, but they are not required by any means. And particularly on the rares, I will once again mention that these are, relatively speaking, end game builds. So if you're in the early game just starting out, then I'll tell you the appropriate stats that you don't necessarily need to focus on in order to succeed with these champions in the early game. So starting off, we have Apothecary, who you guys have seen multiple times if you've been paying attention to this particular series. We have 52,000 on the HP, 2,200 on the defense, 255 on the speed, full crit rate because he can crit on his heal on the A2, and then a bunch of resistance, 361. Resistance is most certainly a bonus of the end game, and it is not mandatory in the early game. I would just focus on making him as fast as possible because you just wanted to take as many turns as you can and cycle through his abilities to get the increased speed, turn meter fill, and the healing. And he's in a speed set, a crit rate set, and a resilience set. The blessing on him is Miracle Heal. It gives him a little bit of HP, and I was testing that for a different composition. And for the masteries, we did focus on the offense and support tree. We came all the way down here to Giant Slayer because he does have a triple hitter on the A1. And in the support tree, we focused on the left side, focusing on the healing masteries with a little bit of a speed bonus from Lure of Steel. And then Lasting Gifts is also nice to keep to extend the increased speed on our team. Next up, we have my end game Kale. So you will not have yours built in a stun set in the early game. He's going to be probably in your beginner starter lifesteal set, maybe with a speed set if you can match that you got from campaign. Total stats here are 30,000 on the HP, 3,600 just about on the attack, just under 200 on the speed, full crit rate, and 203 crit damage with 225 on the accuracy. You need about 10 points of accuracy for the level of dungeon stage you're on, capping out at around 230 to 250, I would say, for stage 25 is about what you need. So this is most certainly a damage Kale. I would focus more on a survivability Kale and take advantage of his poisons more so in the early game. So a little bit more on the HP, a little bit less on the attack. Speed should be around here, maybe some crit rate. And then make sure that you have enough accuracy for him to do his job. On the blessing, I have Phantom Touch, which you will see on most of the rares who deal damage just because they get a little bit of attack. Again, it's definitely a bonus and a chance to deal the bonus hit. The masteries for you guys, if you're in the early game, obviously you would come down to War Master because that's what you do to help you kill bosses a bit faster. But again, since this is my end game Kale who was repurposed for Doom Tower Hard Secret Rooms in the stun set, I did come down to Fearsome Presence. So extra chance or higher chance to place the stun with the stun set. Next up, we have my Frozen Banshee who's in a retaliation set with crit damage. She is built for Brutal Clan Boss whenever that challenge comes up that I need to use a rare. Well, I use her every day for Brutal, but it's specifically in case I get that challenge where you have to use a rare in Demon Lord Clan Boss. But on her, we have 35,000 on the HP, 2,700 on the attack, 200 on the speed, full crit rate, 164 on the crit damage, and then 246 on the accuracy. Again, if you're using her in the early game for Demon Lord Clan Boss as one of your starter or poisoners, I would not build her for damage. I would build her for survivability, make sure that she survives long enough to keep placing as many poisons as possible. But the retaliation set is a nice two-piece filler if you can swing that in the early game. So again, ignoring the crit rate, crit damage, make sure she has enough speed and accuracy to do the job, and make sure that she can stay alive. For the blessing, like we said, Phantom Touch. Again, she is in a damage build, so extra damage is extra damage. And then this is more akin to what your starter Kale would have for masteries, hugging the left side of the offense tree, coming all the way down to War Master, and then picking up some of the debuffer masteries here on the support tree, coming down to Master Hexer as the final mastery for T5. War Maiden is a similar story. We have her in Perception and Immortal. She again is built for damage in the end game, but for the early game, if she's just your primary debuffer or your first debuffer, focus on the speed and the accuracy and survivability in the build. So 38,000 or just under 38,000 on the HP, 2,900 on the attack, 232 on the speed, so pretty quick. All she needs to do is go before your nukers, whoever they are on your team, in order to deal the most amount of damage. Full crit rate, 200% crit damage or 210% crit damage, and then 263 on the accuracy. I do still use her in Faction Wars, but she doesn't need to be super survivable in that context. I just need her to place decreased defense for my nukers on that squad. For the Blessing Phantom Touch, again, for the same reasons as the other few champions, it's just more damage and more chances at more damage, as well as a boosted attack. And then for the masteries, same thing. We're coming down on the left-hand side on the offense tree. We're ending on War Master, helping her deal damage to bosses, and we're picking up some of the debuffer masteries in the support tree on the right. I didn't feel the need to finish her masteries just because it just didn't really help, and I replaced her soon enough that I didn't really need to farm all the way out to the having all the T5s. But if I had the choice, I'd probably come down to Master Hexer to extend the decreased defense, and maybe Sniper for a higher chance to place poisons on the A1. Next up, we have my Reliquary Tender, who we've seen many times on the channel. So she is in a Relentless set, and she has 60,000 on the HP. She is a support, so we're getting away from the DPS for a little bit. 2,700 on the defense, 240 on the speed, and then 410 on the resistance. Once again, in the early game, I would build her similar to an Apothecary. You don't have to run Relentless, although it is a very great set for her to get back to her revive and cleanse sooner. But resistance is most certainly a bonus. I would just focus on keeping her fast, because the more turns she can take, the more healing she can do, etc. For the Blessing, I did choose Dark Resolve on her because I do use her in Faction Wars, and there's a chance that she can block, 10% chance that she can block the freeze, which cannot be resisted from the boss. So that was a strategic choice on her Blessing. And for the masteries, she is another boss killing type champion, so we are hugging the left hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master as a T6. And then I didn't elect to finish all of her T5s, but we did make sure to come down to Lasting Gifts to extend the duration of the continuous heals that she places on her A2. Switching over to the epics, we have a couple of my nukers here that were featured in this video. We have Dark Elhain in a Savage set, and she is built as such. 38,000 on the HP, 5.4k on the attack, 163 speed, and that is on purpose. She is extremely or relatively slow because I'm using her primarily in Arena as a counter to like a Torment or any champions that freeze, and I don't really need her fast because she automatically activates her A2 whenever an ally or herself is frozen, so doesn't really need a bunch of speed. Full crit rate, 215 on the crit damage, don't care about the accuracy or resist. And I will note here that we do have attack percentage on her boots in particular. If you can get away with that, if you have them, I do recommend building her that way if you're using her in this manner to abuse being frozen. No Blessing on her because I do not have a soul, and if we come over to the masteries, she is a nuker, so we went the nuker route coming down to Helm Smasher, and then we did not finish out the T5s, but I would probably go with Retribution if I had the choice or had the wherewithal to finish it out, and then maybe Methodical because she only uses her A1 in between A2s. But aside from that, we're just coming down, picking up some key masteries to make sure that she's, dealing most damage when she's full HP, and then Cycle of Violence to potentially get a cooldown reduction because she only has one ability on the A2. Our other nuker here is Fanax here, who's in a lethal set, so the upgraded Savage set from the Dark Fae. His total stats, we have 31,000 on the HP, 4.5k on the attack, 200 on the speed, full crit rate, 240 on the crit damage, and then 252 on the accuracy. So I did make sure to try and build him with enough accuracy to make sure that he can actually land debuffs whenever I need to sub him in for teams, but also for Faction Wars, I do want to land block buffs whenever I can on the waves and such. For the Blessing on him, I did get a 1-star, and we do have Crushing Rend, so we could ignore a little bit of extra defense on the first hit. Not a big difference, but it does help a little bit. And then he can't have higher things because it's an epic. And then if we come down here, we can see the masteries, where it's essentially the same as Dark Elhain's, where we're coming down on the offense tree to get Helm Smasher, but we're picking up some of the damage dealing masteries along the way on the left side in the middle, and then a little bit of the support tree, a little bit of the debuffer route to take advantage of the fact that he does have accuracy in his particular build. Once again, I did not elect to finish his last T5, but I would probably recommend going for Master Hexer and or Sniper if you want to maximize his A3, as well as increase the chance of placing block buffs on the A2, because it's not 100% chance. He also has a chance to place block active skills if the block buffs is not placed, although that won't land on bosses, for example. Next up, we have my Stag Knight here in a shield set and an immortal set. He's kind of just a utility build. He's not on any team in particular for right now, but I do have him in this set for Faction Wars just to help protect the team a little bit more, particularly when the boss stage has some minions that ignore defense and whatnot, but they do not ignore shield. So 64,000 on the HP, 2,600 on the defense. He is a support. 253 on the speed, so very, very fast. We don't care about his damage, although I've heard he can hit relatively hard despite being a support champion. His abilities are attack based. And then 417 on the accuracy, which is most certainly overkill for most areas of the game, but I'm kind of future-proofing him in case I need to swap him into some sort of Doom Tower team or any waves in the Cursed City of Centranos. For my debuffers, Epic and above, I do like to run Cruelty on them because they already decrease defense regularly on an AoE, and so having a little bit more decreased defense is not a bad thing to have. For the masteries, you can see that there are none. He's in the backlog of champions that I need masteries or need to get masteries for, but similar to what you've already seen, he is a debuffer, so I'd probably hug the left-hand side of the offense tree, coming down to War Master for boss killing purposes, and I would make sure to definitely pick up Sniper because his AoE ability, decrease of defense, decrease attack, is actually a 95% chance to land both of those, and so you'd actually want to get this to 100 with the Sniper Mastery, and of course pair that with Master Hexer because extending it is also a good thing. Next up, we have my Vogoth, who is the only champion on my account who has a really terrible but notably bolster set with a Mortal, because bolster is a fake set to us free-to-play players who get nothing from the Forge passes. So we have almost 90,000 on the HP, 2,500 on the defense. He's most certainly a support champion. 151 on the speed, very slow because all he needs to do is sit there and soak up damage on behalf of other members. We don't really care about him taking that many turns, but that is how I build him. He's primarily an arena champion. You probably want him a little bit faster, sacrificing some of these defensive stats if you want to take advantage of his provoke. So a good amount of resistance, 416, and then 237 on the accuracy. Again, enough to deal with waves and faction wars and the dungeons for these types of showcases. And I guess to land it on some low resistance people in the arena as well, probably nukers and stuff like that. For the blessing, I went with commanding presence, just boost the power of whoever's aura a little bit. I didn't fuss too much about picking a blessing for him because he just kind of sits there and soaks up damage. And his masteries reflect that as well. Again, if you're going more for the boss killing route, helping your team kill bosses, then I would focus on the offense tree and come down to Giant Slayer because he does have a triple hitter on the A1, which makes it good for that. But I came down the defense tree, making sure to get Bulwark, so he just takes more damage on behalf of the team, as well as getting Selfless Defender, so he takes the first hit damage, or takes a good chunk of the first hit damage from everyone else. As you can see, I also did not finish his masteries, but if I had to choose, I'd probably go with Cycle of Revenge, as well as Sniper. You can't really, or Master Hexer isn't as good on him, because you could extend the duration of the leech, but he's going to be hit so often, because a lot of bosses do a lot of AoEs, so he's going to just place the leech pretty much the entire, or keep it up the entire time just by being hit. So Master Hexer doesn't exactly work. And then the decreased attack can only land on targets where he lands the provoke, meaning it's not going to help you against bosses. So I think Sniper is better for the A1 to have a better chance of increasing the duration of debuffs on the A1. Next up, we have my Dark Kale here in a Relentless set and Retaliation. And his total stats are 48,000 on the HP. He is a attack-based champion, but I built him more for the supporting role because he's a utility champion. So 2,700 on the attack, a little bit. 2,300 on the defense. 241 on the speed, so pretty quick. Full crit rate because he does need that to extend debuffs on the A2. And then 353 on the accuracy, enough to land debuffs in Doom Tower Hard and beyond. For his blessing, because I typically do open with the A2 on him, which is an AoE attack, I did run Cruelty, and then if he's taking pot shots at the boss with the A1 later on, 3 hits is a good chance to stack up Cruelty or max out Cruelty, so it makes sense for him, but you could definitely also run Phantom Touch if you built him a little bit more for damage. As we noted there, triple hitter on the A1, so we did make sure to come down to Giant Slayer on the offense tree, hugging the left-hand side like usual, and on the support tree, we're hugging the right side for all of the buffer masteries, making sure to end on Master Hexer as well as Sniper here. For Venom Mage, I did revamp her build. She's in double perception. I rebuilt her or upgraded her build for Amius when I was trying out teams that beat him. I did not beat him on rotation 1, unfortunately, but rotation 2, I might be able to do so. We'll see when I get there in a couple of weeks. But Venom Mage is a support champion, so 50,000 on the HP, 3,500 on the defense, 253 on the speed, and then 489 on the accuracy, showing the power of the perception sets. For her blessing, I didn't really put much thought into it, so I just put a little bit of extra damage by getting Phantom Touch. There wasn't much else utility that I can get from other blessings, so that's what I opted for. I thought about running Cruelty because she does have an AoE, kind of like Dark Kale, same logic. She's also going to pop a bunch of poisons with the A1, but since I run them together on the same Ice Golem team as you saw, it seemed redundant, and so I didn't really want to go that route. For the masteries, same thing as Dark Kale, essentially. We're coming down, or well, same thing as most debuffers. We're coming down the left-hand side, ending on War Master. She does have a double hitter on the A1, but triple hitter is where you really want to cross the threshold to go to Giant Slayer instead of War Master. Double hitter, you still want to stick with War Master. So hugging the left-hand side of the offense tree, and then the right-hand side of the support tree, getting a lot of these. I didn't elect to finish her masteries, but if I had the choice, I would probably just end on Master Hexer to extend the duration of all of her debuffs that she places. Rounding it off with the legendaries, we have our super built Artak here, who is in Perception, Double Perception, and Stone Skin, which is basically a resistance set when you use 2 pieces. 80,000 on the HP, 2,400 on the defense, 246 on the speed, 431 on the resistance, whilst also having 350 on the accuracy. He is built to be able to resist most things in the game outside of like Sand Devil, Amius, and the Shogun's Grove, and then also be able to land debuffs in Hydra and Doom Tower Hard. For the Blessing, of course, we do have Brimstone on him. It's good for most legendaries, especially those used in PvE, like I do use him. And then for the Masteries, we did not opt to go for War Master because I plan, hopefully, to use them eventually in an Ice Golem team, so we don't want the extra chance to hit War Master on the boss because he does have AoE on every single ability. So we're focusing on the defense tree and the support tree, namely coming down to Oppressor because he gets a little bit more turn meter fill for placing all of the debuffs, so all the HP burns, decrease attacks out there, so he just runs a little bit faster on top of his passive, increasing his speed overall. Obviously, we want Master Hexer as well, and if I had to finish his masteries, you're sensing a pattern here that I typically don't finish T5s unless I really, really need it. I'd probably come down to Sniper to increase the chance of him landing or extending HP burns on the A1. Also, Retribution is pretty handy because if he can counterattack, he also has an extra chance to increase the duration of HP burns on the A1. For Pythion, we have a nice hybrid build of PvE and PvP, but we did go with a regen set to make sure that he can heal himself. His healing abilities were not enough on their own, in my opinion, so I like to stack him with the regen set, although bolster set would be really good on him as well if I could make that happen. So for his stats, we have 87,000 on the HP, almost 3,000 on the defense, 254 on the speed, and then 553 on the resistance, and impressively 0 accuracy in the build, not even on anything, 80 just from the Great Hall. So a fun fact there. But Reaction Ring is also nice because, again, a little bit of an arena hybrid there. I do use him in both. For the Blessing, I went through a lot of iterations on him, but I finally settled on Life Harvest. This is, again, more arena focused, so that if the enemy team keeps reviving their champions, we'll start destroying their max HP every time they do so. It just makes them easier to kill. And then we are focusing on the defense and support tree in the masteries, making sure to come down to Unshakable for the extra resistance, again, to block debuffs from, or prevent debuffs from landing on us with resistance. And then Retribution, of course, counterattacking is more healing off of the A1. And then support tree, as you might guess, we're coming down the left-hand side, focusing on the healing masteries, as well as ending on Lasting Gifts to extend the duration of block debuffs. And then Spirit Haste, which makes them a little bit faster if people start to die, so we can get back to reviving them a little bit faster. And lastly, we have my Cracked Out Theodore, Immortal, Perception, Resistance, and a lovely refresh ring to boot. So him, another support champion, 65,000 on the HP, 3,200 on the defense, 242 on the speed, just like Artak, 458 resistance, and 375 on the accuracy. So a good mix to be able to resist debuffs in the hard mode Doom Tower, or hard mode dungeons and Doom Tower Hard, and then place debuffs as well on those areas. For the Blessing, I was fortunate enough to get a 4-star soul for him, so we are running a high tier Brimstone, which does help a little bit of HP and a lot of accuracy on top. And then for the masteries, similar to Artak, we're coming down to Oppressor because he does place a lot of debuffs, a lot of poisons, poison sensitivity, decreased speed, and potentially weaken. So a lot of debuffs, which gives him a lot of turn meter fill rate, which helps him cycle more turns, getting back to activating the poisons and the HP burns. Master Hexer to extend all of what we just talked about, a little bit of the debuffer masteries along the side, and then a little bit of the defense tree as well. All right, so that's going to do it for this video, deep diving the Ice Golem from all stages of progression in the game. As always, if you did find this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. And if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to hit the subscribe button down below for more content just like this one in the future. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.